congratulations on your relatively recent nuptials.
Thank you.
I could only imagine that running for mayor of the largest city in the United States and planning a wedding at the same time is no easy feat. How did you manage it?
Well, I think New Yorkers deserve a leader that hustles just as hard as they do. And finding the time is also much more possible when you have a partner who's just as supportive as mine is. And I've been so lucky to not only fall in love, but to have a wife who has been at the heart of making this decision of running for mayor many, many months ago. And now we see, with just about 6 weeks left, that we have a real path to win this race.
And so from marital promises to campaign promises,
Yes.
Let's dive right in.
You have to fulfill them all.
That's right. And you know what they say? They say that this is the second toughest political job in the United States outside of the presidency. So let's start out by asking you, why should voters trust that you're up for the challenge?
First and foremost, because I actually understand the number one crisis in this city, which is a crisis of affordability. And you can see that in the polls around how New Yorkers are feeling in this moment. You can also see that in conversations you have with New Yorkers. There are so many people who have helped to build this city, sustain this city, but they don't know if they can call themselves New Yorkers next year because they don't know if they can afford their rent or their childcare or their groceries or even their Metro card. And fundamentally, this is a campaign about delivering them a city they can actually afford.
And you mentioned rent, right? The Rent Guidelines Board is considering another round of rent hikes coming up for stabilized units. What act would you take as mayor if the board approves those hikes this summer?
I would freeze the rent. And I've said that because we have close to 2.5 million New Yorkers who live in rent-stabilized housing. These are New Yorkers with a median household income of $60,000. And the Rent Guidelines Board found that in the last study, the landlords of those units saw a 12% increase in their revenue. And what we need in this moment is relief for those tenants who are on the brink of being priced out of the city that they call their home.
Another front of mind issue for a lot of viewers across our News 12 footprint is the immigration policies. One of the top concerns. Now, as mayor, would you cooperate with ICE as Mayor Adams has in recent weeks, or would you like to change course?
I would change course. I would be, as elected, the first immigrant mayor of this city in generations. And I got my citizenship not too far from here, not too many years ago. And I understand just how deeply terrified so many immigrant New Yorkers are in this moment, where we have a mayor who is willing to throw them away to continue to secure his own personal freedom. And we have a former governor running for Eric Adams' second term, running without the appetite to actually put up a fight to Donald Trump, who in this moment is putting New Yorkers firmly within his crosshairs.
So, pointing out the obvious, you're a self-proclaimed democratic socialist running for mayor of the financial capital of the world. How do you reconcile that contrast, and what would democratic socialism actually look like at City Hall for you?
So to me, democratic socialism is a belief that every person should have what they need to live a dignified life, and that it's local government's job to ensure that. And when you look across the city, you ask New Yorkers, there's a general understanding that if we're talking about K through 12 education or sanitation or libraries, that this is something that's a public good. But there are so many other things that we understand are just as critical to living a dignified life that we're pricing people out of. If it's their rent, if it's their food, if it's their childcare, these are not negotiable things. These are things that every New Yorker needs to call the city their home. And ultimately, what a city hall would look like under the leadership of a democratic socialist mayor is a city hall that is fairer, a city hall that puts working people at the heart of it, and a city hall that understands that in this country, where we have seen income inequality decline, we're seeing it rise in our city, and we have to bring an end to that.
To that end, you've proposed city-run grocery stores, fare-free public transit. Supporters certainly say that your plans are bold, but your critics call them unrealistic. How do you plan to fund these ideas without driving away business or middle-class taxpayers?
So let's take these two examples. A network of municipal-run grocery stores, one in each borough, so 5 in total, would cost the city $60 million. The city is already set to spend more than $140 million subsidizing corporate supermarket chains without any guarantee of affordability from that subsidy. So this is less than half of what we're already set to spend. When it comes to fare-free buses, the cost of that is about $700 million a year. That's in the context of a city budget of $115 billion, a state budget of $252 billion. And what we've put forward is a plan to raise $10 billion a year that would make those buses free, pay for universal childcare, and give us the fiscal flexibility to Trump-proof our city by raising taxes on the most profitable corporations in the state to match that of New Jersey's top corporate tax rate, 11.5%, and by raising taxes on the top 1% of New Yorkers who make $1 million a year or more by a flat 2% increase, just $20,000, which for someone making $1 million is more like a rounding error.
And talking public safety now, another crucial issue. A lot of your opponents are looking to beef up the NYPD, add more officers at a time when they are saying they are critically short-staffed. Your plan is somewhat different. You want to create a new agency altogether outside of the NYPD. But with a lot of New Yorkers, especially in high-crime neighborhoods, we've done a lot of investigative work, especially with gun violence in recent months. People there, a lot of them are asking for more police, not less. So how do you square your views with their concerns, while of course also addressing the attrition, the overtime issues that the NYPD is battling right now?
Police have a critical role to play in creating public safety. And what we're doing right now, however, is relying on them for almost every single failure of the social safety net. And that reliance is preventing them from doing their actual jobs. And you can see that in the stubbornly low clearance rates for the major 7 categories of crime. And when I speak to New Yorkers, like you said, safety is a top concern. They also want to see more of these crimes actually be solved. And the only way we can do that is if we allow police to do their jobs and hire trained mental health professionals and social workers to do the jobs that they were meant to do. And I say that in reference specifically to dealing with the mental health crisis in our city. What we have right now is a system that is failing New Yorkers. It is failing a New Yorker like Win Rosario, a young man who was in the midst of a mental health crisis, when he called 911 and asked for help in his own home when 2 officers who were trained to provide mental health response then shot and killed him within 3 minutes. That does not serve anyone in that situation or the city at large. We need to ensure we bring the strategies that have worked elsewhere in the country, that have been proven successful, and aggressively pursue them here in our city, and chief among them also is gun violence prevention.
You have spoken out obviously quite vocally in the aftermath of the Israel-Hamas war. You are running for mayor in a city that is home to the largest Jewish population outside of Israel. You know this better than anyone. Some of those voters feel that your positions have alienated them. If you win this election, the primary and then the general election, how will you embrace the Jewish community?
Ultimately, to run to be the mayor of this city is to represent each and every New Yorker, not just cherry-picking those that agree with your policies. And I think of Mayor Koch as an example who said that if you agree with me on 9 out of 12 issues, vote for me. If you agree with me on 12 out of 12, see a psychiatrist. Because ultimately, what we need is someone who is able to bridge the divide, especially where there are moments of tension. And I can tell you that I was at a forum earlier in the race, where I was sitting within a synagogue, and at the end of the forum, an older Jewish New Yorker came up to me and whispered in my ear, "I disagree with you on one issue, but I agree with you on the others, and I'm going to be ranking you." And I think that's where there's this possibility where we understand we need not agree on everything, but ultimately we know that these disagreements are still based on a shared humanity. And all of my positions, be it about Israel or Palestine or anywhere in the world, comes back from a belief in universal human rights and a recognition that October 7th was a horrific war crime, and what we have seen since is also a war crime, and we have to be able to say those things in the same breath.
You know, it sounds like that was a pretty powerful encounter you had with that voter in the synagogue. Is there any part of your stances as it relates to Israel, now being a candidate on the campaign trail for 7 months in the city, that you've revisited? Or do you feel more than ever that your stances are the right ones to have?
You know, I feel that from the beginning of my political career, it's been consistency that I've sought to have in my politics, a belief in international law, a belief in universal human rights, and I think that that has shone through over the course of our campaign. And I also understand that Jewish New Yorkers are concerned about a wide variety of issues. When you look at polling, you see the number one issue is affordability. The next issue is having to do with caregiving of older adults. The next having to do with compensation for that kind of caregiving and that child care. And the issue after that is discrimination. And we have seen a horrific rise in anti-Semitism across the city. Jewish New Yorkers comprise more than half of all victims of hate crimes in this city.
And the worst in the nation, we found out a week ago.
And it's unacceptable. And what I have said is, in proposing the Department of Community Safety, this new department that would finally deliver that public safety New Yorkers have been denied, is a core part of it deals with hate violence and increasing the funding for hate violence prevention programming by 800%. That's the largest of any commitment of any campaign in the race, because ultimately what Jewish New Yorkers deserve is what every New Yorker deserves: safety and a recognition of their innate humanity and dignity in this city, and a city government that actually delivers on that, not just talks about it.
Congestion pricing, needless to say, has become an intense battleground. Should New York revise the program, scrap it, or keep it as is?
I believe we should keep it as is. It is a program that I have supported because of its potential to reduce congestion, to increase bus speeds, and to reduce air quality pollution. And what we've seen is that has been the case in the central business district of Manhattan. Now, I launched a program in Albany called Get Congestion Pricing Right, which said that when we look at the examples of Stockholm and London, other world cities that have implemented this tolling program, they paired it with an immediate enhancement in public transit service. And because of that campaign with Deputy Majority Leader Mike Gianaris in the state Senate, we won more than $12 million in additional bus service. I still believe we need to deliver more and better bus service and subway service to New Yorkers in tandem with this program, because everyone across the city needs to understand this as a moment we transform our streets, we transform our public transit.
Mayor Eric Adams running as an independent, and he says the drop federal charges do not leave him beholden to Donald Trump. Do you buy that?
Not at all. And I think most New Yorkers don't either, because they don't have to listen to his words. They can look at his actions. And his actions are one that you earlier described correctly as collaborating with ICE and collaborating with the Trump administration. And we've seen Andrew Cuomo only offer cowardice. What we need in the response to Donald Trump's attack on this city is courage, conviction, and clarity. And I will be offering that as the next mayor.
Rikers Island. Can you commit to closing Rikers by the 2027 deadline and opening borough-based jails as currently planned? And also would love for you to weigh in whether you feel that the city should have oversight over our jail system versus an independent monitor.
What we've seen is that the city's oversight under Mayor Adams has been one that has been a betrayal of so many of the core promises and hopes of the campaign to close Rikers Island. This mayor has rendered it functionally impossible to close Rikers by the date of 2027, and he has done so by not even trying to follow that timeline. What I would do from the first day I was the mayor is not only use every single tool at my disposal to close this island, but to ensure that we do not continue the Eric Adams legacy of incarcerating even more New Yorkers than we had prior to when he came into office.
So can you commit to getting that done by 2027?
I'm going to do everything I can. It's my hope to deliver it, but ultimately what Eric Adams has done is made it functionally impossible to abide by that same timeline. I hope to disprove that.
What do you think is a reasonable timeline?
You know, it is something that I will absolutely hope to do as close as we can to 2027. And I think from the first day of my administration, it's going to be a priority of mine to ensure that we actually deliver public safety. I'll give you an example. Rikers Island is currently providing mental health services for about 40% of its incarcerated population. That's at the cost of $550,000 a year per person. Now, we see New Yorkers who are facing mental health issues in our city. That is the largest provider of mental health services. It should not be that way. Meanwhile, we have programs like clubhouses, better known through one of the examples of Fountain House. They treat New Yorkers with SMI, serious mental illness, at a far better efficiency and effectiveness than Rikers Island, increased rates of employment, decreased rates of loneliness, decreased rates of hospitalization, and the cost of that for a year is $4,000. That's about 2 or 3 days on Rikers. Rikers is not just a moral stain, it's also a fiscal stain and a political stain on our city.
But facilities like that are overcrowded, there's not enough beds, so what would you do? Create more facilities?
Which facilities? The clubhouses?
Yeah.
Absolutely. That is the goal here. We have clubhouses which currently are only in a few neighborhoods. We need to have a clubhouse in every single neighborhood. We need to have community mental health navigators that are in the community. And what we mean by that is taking away the stigma of mental health and the crisis that it is, and finally making it as easy as possible for New Yorkers to access those kinds of services.
Let's talk electability. You have been called everything from a visionary to a radical, sometimes within the same sentence. What's the biggest misconception about you?
I think the biggest misconception is that we can't win this race. You know, many people have put ceilings on our campaign from the beginning. They first said we couldn't hit 5, then 10, then 15, now 20%. And yet I sit speaking with you as a candidate who in the last poll was at 22%. And we don't live and die by these polls, but they do reflect a growing momentum and a growing hunger for a different kind of politics in this city, one that puts working people first. And what we will deliver on June 24th is not just a surprise or a statement, it'll be a victory. And we're confident of doing that because while there isn't an ideological majority in this city, be it progressives or any other, we know a majority of New Yorkers feel left behind by the economic policies of this mayoral administration and of politics today. And we're going to finally answer that with an agenda to make the city affordable.
You know, you mentioned the polls. I'm a big believer that the only one that counts is the one on election day.
Absolutely.
But the latest poll that we did see a few days before we are sitting down here before this interview was a Marist poll that showed Andrew Cuomo was ahead, a double-digit lead. That's certainly a steep hill for you to climb.
It is, but I've been climbing a steep hill ever since we started this campaign. And I would tell you that a few months ago, the final round had Andrew Cuomo leading me by about 40 points. In that poll you just referenced, that lead is cut in half to about 20 points. And we think that over the next few weeks, we are going to cut that lead in half again and again and again until we get to 51% on election night.
Ranked choice voting has certainly reshaped New York State politics. Which candidates do you see as your allies in this race, and who poses the biggest threat to your support?
You know, I have long said that I would only critique failed and disgraced executives of our city, be they present or past, and that has only pertained to Eric Adams and Andrew Cuomo. That's where I've kept my fire, because that's where we need to turn the page on that chapter of failed leadership. There are a number of other candidates running looking to turn that same page, and I think that I'm committed to cross-endorsing well before Election Day so that we can let New Yorkers know not only fill their ballot, not only leave Andrew Cuomo off of it, but who else should actually be on that ballot. And
which among them are your strongest allies?
You know, I think there are a number of them. I'm proud to be on a Working Families Party slate with 3 of them, with Brad Lander, Adrian Adams, Zelnor Myrie. Those are other candidates that are looking to turn that same page. And what I would say is the greatest threat to our vision for the future is Andrew Cuomo's vision for the past. And he wants to bring us back to a time when he was the governor, cutting Medicaid, stealing hundreds of millions of dollars from the MTA, claiming to fight for working people while giving his rich donors tax breaks. New Yorkers are tired of that. They're tired of that in Washington today under Donald Trump. They want a new kind of leader, and that's what our campaign presents.
And you know, you've earned a lot of endorsements from fellow progressives. Jamal Bowman came out the other day to support you, but you can't help but notice that AOC has stayed silent so far. Why do you think that is?
You know, I am proud to be represented by Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez and have been represented for many, many years. And I think she's done a terrific job in Washington. And I think she, like many others, are taking a look at this race and seeing how it is starting to play out. And I am looking to earn her endorsement and everyone's endorsement over the course of it, because ultimately what we know is that even though I've been running for more than 6 months, most New Yorkers are just tuning in now. This is the time really when the election begins, and there is still a long way to go for us to win that race on June 24th.
Do you expect that you will ultimately receive her endorsement in this race?
I hope to earn it.
If you win the keys to Gracie Mansion, who are some of the names you would tap for top posts in your administration?
You know, just as much as I've been having a public schedule across the 5 boroughs, I've been having a private schedule where I've been meeting with deputy mayors and commissioners from previous mayoral administrations. Because what New Yorkers deserve from me as their next mayor is a team that spans generations, a team that spans different administrations, and a team that ultimately is brought together by a shared excellence. We need to bring public excellence back into public service, and we've been missing that under this mayoral administration. And I'm very excited by the people that have been helping us not only understand the why or the what, but the how, because delivering this agenda is the #1 priority that I have.
Finish this sentence. If I win this race, it will be because...
Working people stand up and ask for a mayor that represents them.
If I lose this race, it will be because...
Andrew Cuomo's record doesn't come out.
You often share your family's immigrant story and your mother's success as a filmmaker. How has that shaped your views on power, privilege, and opportunity here in New York City?
You know, both of my parents came to this country on scholarships, and my father, in 1962, my mother about a decade later. And this was the country where they pursued their dreams. My father is an academic, my mother is a filmmaker. And my mother, for a long time as I've been growing up, has always told me, if we don't tell our own stories, no one else will. And that has been a responsibility that I've sought to live up to, of telling the stories, not only of myself, but also the stories of New Yorkers everywhere whose experiences are not being recognized at the heart of our politics. And always they left with me an understanding that though they have been successful, every other New Yorker is no less deserving of the benefits of that success. Everyone should have a childhood where you have an education, you have a home, you have healthcare, you have the ability to do more than just struggle. And I hope to deliver that for each and every New Yorker, no matter what zip code they live in.